Hello, and welcome to this Chemistry World webinar. I'm Mariana Kneppers, Chemistry World Science Media Producer, and I'll be your guide through the webinar platform we're using today to help you make the most of the next hour. Now, in today's webinar, we have the pleasure of hosting Michael Freemantle, a longtime friend of Chemistry World. Michael is a prolific science writer. He has written a number of books on a range of topics, some of the titles you can see here. He's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry and has taught chemistry at various levels, both in the UK and abroad. There he is. He has held many titles, from Information Officer at the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, as well as European Science Editor and Senior Correspondent for Chemical and Engineering News. We're very excited to have him here with us today to share his latest publication, Nature's Amazing Chemistry. Michael's book is available for purchase through the RSC's bookstore, and you can use discount code AMAZING25 at checkout to get 25% off. Finally, we will be ending the webinar with a Q&A session with Michael, so please be sure to submit your questions through the webinar. Now, without further ado, I'm going to pass things along to Michael. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Mariana, for that nice introduction, and also thanks to the Royal Society of Chemistry and Chemistry World for inviting me to present this webinar about my book, Nature's Amazing Chemistry, which was published by the Royal Society of Chemistry last month. The book is essentially a collection of essays, stories, snapshots about various aspects of nature's amazing chemistry that have caught my attention over my long career as a chemist. The book is aimed at not just chemists or scientists, but also the general reader, anybody who's fascinated by the chemistry of our own existence and the world around us. The book is intended as a popular science book. I suppose the central message of the book is that nature is a supreme chemist. It carries out chemistry of immense complexity that have challenged even the most talented chemist in the past century. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, the book essentially is divided into 5 sections. The first chapter introduces some of the main themes about the book. There is also some autobiographical content in the book. There's some pictures, photographs which I took myself, 1 or 2 stories about nature's chemicals, and 1 or 2 molecular structures. It's followed by 10 chapters on various aspects of animal chemistry. There are 8 chapters on plants, various aspects of the chemistry of plants, and the 6 chapters on nature's inorganic chemistry, nitrates, other minerals, and gases like hydrogen sulfide. And the final chapter is devoted to soil, which I will get onto later. You may wonder why there's a sheep staring at you there. There's a picture I took quite recently, well, 8 years ago. Sheep secrete a chemical substance called wool wax or wool fat, wool grease from their sebaceous glands, and it helps to protect them from all sorts of weathers, wet weather and so on, and also protects them from infections and bacterial infections, fungal infections, and so on. And so I thought it was a fairly simple example of nature's amazing chemistry, its complexity and diversity. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, the raw wool wax. The wool wax has been used for centuries by people for various purposes. For example, for medicinal purposes, for cosmetic purposes, and even for embalming dead bodies. The raw material consists of 4 components. The wax itself, which is mainly lanolin, and there's dirt and dust and suet. And the wax, the raw wool wax, can be separated from the rest of the material by immersing the sheep's fleece in water. And the water is then brought to the boil, and the sheep's fleece is removed, and then the water is allowed to cool, and the wax rises to the top, where it can be skimmed off in the old days, or nowadays I suppose centrifuges are used. The pure lanolin which is in the wool wax is made up of lanolin wax esters. These esters, nature has made them from lanolin acids. These are fatty acids, the sort of long hydrocarbon chains attached to a carboxylic acid group, which is there represented by CO2H. And the acids combined with the alcohols in nature, the alcohols such as cholesterol, they have an OH group, and you get these wax esters, and they're meant to be about 8,000 to 20,000 of these different wax esters in lanolin, and they account for about 97% of the weight of lanolin. Now, the chapter on lanolin and sheep tells a story of a shepherd and a draper. Now, the draper lived, I have to explain first of all that I'm here in Basingstoke. This is my study in my home in Basingstoke, which is a town in Hampshire in the south of England. And this draper set up a shop in Basingstoke, in the centre of Basingstoke, in the 1850s to make outdoor clothing for farm workers, for shepherds, and for hunting people, hunting, shooting, and fishing, and so on. And he used tightly woven fabrics made of wool or cotton. And one day, and this is a story, the legend, he met a shepherd. Shepherd came into his shop and was discussing about dipping sheep in a disinfectant to remove infections and so on. And the shepherd explained to him that when he was dipping the sheep, the smock that he was wearing became waterproof from the wax. And the draper was fascinated by this. And so he decided to look at the possibility of developing a fabric which could be waterproof using the pure lanolin or the wool wax. And eventually he came up with a fabric which did this work. And he set up a factory in Basingstoke to make it. The fabric was called gabardine. You may have heard of it. And it's used to make trench coats in the First World War. And you will have heard of his name. It's Thomas Burberry. The name still exists, the global fashion empire, luxury empire, the Burberry empire, fashion empire. And what I find remarkable is that this luxury fashion house originated in an informal discussion between a shepherd and a draper about one of nature's amazing chemical products, which is wool wax. Can I have the next slide, please? Thomas Burberry is buried in Basingstoke. There's a picture of his grave there. It's in what's called the Holy Ghost Cemetery, which is right next to the railway station. And on the right-hand side, there's a picture of the blue plaque, which commemorates him above the factory where the site where the factory used to be. Now it's the Gabardine Bar, a bar which I have to confess I have never been into. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, now, how do I get my eyes and ideas and inspirations for the various aspects, the various chapters and stories in this book? And quite often it's through walking. Now, if I look out of my window behind my computer screen here, there's a small garden, a fence, and a green. And through the green, there's a path that runs up to this path, which we call the Roman Road Path. It's called the Roman Road Path because it runs from a town called Silchester in Hampshire, which was a Roman town, right through to Winchester, which was the ancient capital of England. And I frequently walk along this 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes with my wife, Mary. And on the right-hand side is a down called Battle Down. I describe this in the book. And that's where that sheep that you saw just a moment ago was grazing. And if you look up the down, past the yellow oilseed rape fields, you see a tree line at the top there. And beyond that tree line, there's a village about 2 or 3 miles away called Steventon. And that's where the famous English novelist Jane Austen was born. And she wrote 3 of her novels there. And I mentioned Jane Austen 2 or 3 times in my book. I'll give you just one example. If you look at the left-hand side of the picture, behind these dark green trees here, there's another down called Old Down. And this path leads up to a meadow in the down. And in the spring and summer, there are beautiful flowers. And one of them I've written a chapter about in the book. The flower is called Lady's Bedstraw. And the bedstraw was used in Jane Austen's time to pack mattresses. And the reason for that was that the lady's bedstraw emits that gives off a lovely fragrance. It's a chemical called coumarin, and also it deters fleas and so on. So this is why ladies in Jane Austen's time used to pack mattresses with this bedstraw. And nature makes loads of these coumarins, and one of them was used to develop a medicine, a drug that I used to take many years ago, an anticoagulant drug called warfarin. So I describe all that in my book. I think we're going to have a poll now.
Yeah, so this is a poll that Michael, we're doing now, which is all about where do you get your inspiration? I think, Michael, you've discussed you get a lot of your inspiration while going on walks in this lovely countryside that you're so fortunate to live near. Very jealous. I'd say I'd get my kind of inspiration from walks like that as well. But it looks like a lot of the audience as well gets their inspiration from walks, and yeah, it's good to get inspiration when you have such a lovely kind of, natural area around you, isn't it? All right, I think that is the majority of responses we're going to get. I mean, it seems like a pretty even split between while out on a walk reading books or, just strikes at random, which it's an interesting one, isn't it? So yeah, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you, Michael.
Thank you very much. More or less the same as with me. I get a lot of inspiration while out walking and also reading books or watching TV and so on. I just want to come back to this slide here. You see on the right-hand side, that's battle down, and there's a hedge there and a hedgerow. And in January and February, you see snowdrops beginning to appear there. And 2 or 3 years ago, I was walking along this path, looking at the snowdrops, these beautiful flowers. Can I have the next slide, please? And I took a picture of them, and I thought to myself, there must be a lot of chemistry involved in these beautiful flowers. How do they survive in the winter? I mean, it's cold at the time. So I came back to my study here and started investigating, doing some research on this. And I realized there was a lot of chemistry involved in keeping snowdrops alive. Can I have the next slide, please? The first thing I discovered when I was doing research on this, that snowdrops contain antifreeze proteins. Now, I was familiar with antifreeze proteins because I'd written about them in the past, but for fish in the Arctic and Antarctic, and the antifreeze proteins work by encasing the microscopic crystals of ice as soon as they form, stopping them growing larger, because if they grew larger, they'd be fatal to the animals like the cod and so on that live in these cold waters. But I didn't realize that snowdrops and plants contain antifreeze proteins. So that's number one thing I learned. The second is another protein which acts as an insecticide, and that is Galanthus nivalis agglutinin. Galanthus nivalis, incidentally, is the Latin name for the common snowdrop. And that protein is often abbreviated to GNA. It's a type of protein called a lectin. And lectins are proteins that combine with carbohydrates. In the case of GNA, it combines with mannose, and it prevents insects that chew on plants, or like the snowdrop, for example, or suck their sap. It binds to the mannose, which is a simple monosaccharide sugar. It binds to the mannose in their guts and forms clumps, and that process is called agglutination. Another thing I discovered, whilst I was researching all this, is that I found a paper that showed that snowdrops contain up to 10 or more alkaloids. Now, alkaloids are produced prodigiously by plants. They all have organic structures containing nitrogen, and they all have an impact on our bodies. You will be familiar with some of them: strychnine, morphine, codeine, atropine, quinine. They're all alkaloids. And one of the alkaloids in snowdrops was called licorine, which I read has potential anti-cancer properties. I just got a pop-up there. Another one is galantamine. That's the structure of galantamine on the right there. And galantamine has been developed for use to treat Alzheimer's disease. And it does so by inhibiting the activity of an enzyme in our bodies that destroys one of the neurotransmitters in our body, in our nervous system. And so by inhibiting that enzyme, the galantamine actually increases the productivity of that neurotransmitter. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, chlorophyll. Of course, snowdrops also contain chlorophyll. I'll explain what chlorophyll A is in a minute. This is a picture on the left, by the way, of I took many years ago, about 20 or so years ago, in Exbury Gardens. There's a gardens that are open to the public in Hampshire, near the New Forest or in the New Forest. So on the right-hand side, we have the molecular structure of chlorophyll A. Or in the center, you will see magnesium. There's a magnesium ion, and it's bound to 4 nitrogen atoms. And each nitrogen atom is part of a 5-membered ring. And those rings are called pyrroles. So chlorophyll is a tetrapyrrole. It's not the only tetrapyrrole that nature makes. There are others. The heme and hemoglobin, for example, is a tetrapyrrole which contains iron in the center, and vitamin B12, I think, contains cobalt in the center there. Can I have the next slide, please? All right, this is an important slide, one of the main themes of my book. In 1817, 2 French pharmacists, Joseph Galanthus and Pierre-Joseph Pelletier, managed to isolate chlorophyll for the first time from leaves. And then in 1864, an Irish scientist, George Gabriel Stokes, showed that chlorophyll, he demonstrated there are 2 pigments in chlorophyll, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. There are now known to be more than that. The most abundant of these is chlorophyll A. It's a blue-green pigment, and chlorophyll B is a yellowy-green pigment. In 1905, the German chemist Richard Willstatter, who won the Nobel Prize in 1915 for his work on plant pigments, showed that magnesium was an integral part of chlorophyll. Until then, it had been thought that magnesium was an impurity in chlorophyll. It then took another 35 years and an immense amount of research by another German chemist, Hans Fischer, another Nobel Prize winner, who revealed the molecular structure of chlorophyll, and there is on the right there in the blackboard. Robert Burns Woodward, who you can see on the right there, is one of the most famous he's an American chemist, another Nobel Prize winner, for his work on the synthesis of natural compounds with a very complicated molecular structures like cholesterol and strychnine and so on. And the point here is it took him 49 chemical steps to synthesize chlorophyll in the laboratory. And what I find remarkable here is that it took chemists and scientists 143 years to go from the first isolation of chlorophyll from plants to its synthesis. And it's something that nature does every day throughout the world. And it produces millions of tons of this in these microscopic chemical reactors inside of the plant cells. These are called chloroplasts inside the cells. 100 million tons of that each year. We now use chlorophyll as a food colorant, a food additive. The E numbers, it has 2 E numbers. The E numbers are numbers for the food additives that we put into food. Can I have the next slide, please? Whilst you're doing, I'm going to have a sip of water. One of nature's chemicals. Right, that tree on the right is another tree, one of my favorite trees that we see when we go out walking is nearby. Cellulose is the most abundant, I mean, it occurs in all plants. It's one of the most abundant, it is the most abundant natural organic polymer on Earth. And the polymer, it consists of glucose units, and the glucose unit is represented by that formula at the top. There's C6H10O5. That's the glucose unit. And N is a number of units in the polymer, and that can be up hundreds of thousands. And the cellulose accounts for about 40 to 50% of the dry weight of all plants. Nature makes 180 billion tons of that every year. The cellulose actually occurs in the cell wall, the walls of the plant cells, and there are other polymers in there as well, hemicelluloses, which contain other sugars, and lignin, which is an aromatic polymer. It's the most abundant natural aromatic polymer on Earth. I did a calculation, I have a chapter on cellulose. I did a calculation showing that for every ton of tree, the cellulose in every ton of a tree removes 726 kilograms of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So you can see how planting trees is beneficial to the environment. Can I move on to the next slide, please? The pit viper, interesting here. The venom of snakes, vipers, of spiders, insects, bees, wasps, and so on, consists of a complex cocktail of organic compounds, mainly proteins and peptides. Now I'm showing this because I have a chapter on snake venom, and my point here is that if it wasn't for the research on the snake, the venom of a pit viper, actually the Brazilian pit viper, not this one, a lot of people on this planet would not be alive today, and that includes me, because the research on the venom from the pit viper led to the development of a medicine which is used to treat high blood pressure. It's a hypertension medicine, and I can explain that in a little more detail now. The Brazilian, back in the 1940s, a group of scientists in Brazil did some research on the venom of the Brazilian pit viper, which is one of the most abundant venomous snakes in South America. And they showed that when you injected the venom into the blood of dogs, the blood pressure of the dog decreased. And after a lot of further research, they showed that the chemicals in the venom that caused the decrease in blood pressure were a group of peptides. And the most potent of these peptides was a peptide called teratide, which has 9 amino acids. Because peptides are made of short chains of amino acids. And that peptide reduced blood pressure in 2 ways. And I'll just mention one of them now. In all mammals, and it did so by inhibiting an enzyme that converts one peptide in our body, in our blood, to another peptide. The first peptide is called angiotensin 1. It's called a precursor peptide. It has 10 amino acids, and the enzyme converts it into angiotensin 2, which is the peptide that's responsible for increasing blood pressure. So this enzyme converts angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2, the high blood pressure peptide. It's called an angiotensin converting enzyme. And the teratide in the snake's venom is called an inhibitor, ACE inhibitor. You may have heard of ACE inhibitors. Now, when they did research on this is decades later, they showed that this teratide could be synthesized. They showed that teratide, it was not really effective. It is expensive to make, and also it wasn't clinically effective because you couldn't take it orally. So various research groups then started looking for another compound, a synthetic compound that could mimic the activity of teratide as an ACE inhibitor. And they investigated something like 2,000 different synthetic compounds. And eventually, they came up with the drug that I take today and will be taking later tonight. It's called ramipril. And I just picked a structure of that in the book, and I give a lot more details in the book. Right, can I have the next slide, please? Now for something completely different. This is the scarlet ibis. It's a wading bird that lives on the coast of South America and the Caribbean. And it loves to feed on shrimps and crabs and krill. And at the bottom of the food chain, the marine food chain, are microalgae such as I can't say it properly, Hematococcus pluvialis, which are rich in a pigment called astaxanthin. That's a red pigment, and it's this red pigment, astaxanthin, that gives rise to the red plumage or the scarlet plumage of this ibis, and also to the pink flamingos and other birds that feed on these shrimps and crabs, because they all contain this astaxanthin pigment. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, this is the molecular structure of astaxanthin. Astaxanthin is a type of compound that nature produces. It's called a carotenoid. There's lots of them in nature. In autumn leaves, for example, these contain carotenoids. And there are mainly 2 types of carotenoids. There are the xanthophylls, which contain oxygen atoms. So if you look at the molecular structure here, You see on either side there's 2 oxygen atoms. So astaxanthin is an xanthophil. The other type of carotenoid is a carotene. Carrots, for example, contain beta carotene. This molecular structure, you see these double bonds right joining the 2 ring structures. They're called conjugated double bonds, alternating double bonds. And it's these double bonds, these sequence of alternating double bonds that give rise to the color in the pigment. That's called a chromophore. Can I have another slide? Next slide, please. Astaxanthin can be made, it's made commercially and synthesized, and it's used in marine aquaculture farming for fish farming, salmon and so on, and it's used as a feed additive to impart a pink or red color to the flesh of the fish. Next slide, please. Now here's a puzzle for you. Lobsters, this one on the left is in the sea, the European lobster, they have a similar diet. They have a similar diet to the scarlet ibis and also to the pink flamingo. They feed on shrimps and so on. So why isn't it red? Why is its shell, the exoskeleton, why is it not red? It's a dark color. Well, nature's been very cunning. And it's because the shell does contain astaxanthin, but nature wraps the molecules of astaxanthin in a protein to form what's called a complex called crustacyanin. And it's that crustacyanin that gives the shell its dark color. How the xanthine gets in from the diet, the stomach, the flesh, and into the shell is not known. It's one of these curious processes. And when the lobster is cooked, the crustacyanin complex unravels, releasing the red pigment, and that's why you get a red or orange color in the cooked lobster shown on the right there. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, on the pit, there are about very rarely, maybe 1 in several million lobsters that are landed by fishermen, or lobster fishermen, are not dark colored. They have bright blue colors or bright orange colors or even white colors, but extremely rare. This is one that my wife's second cousin, Francis O'Donnell, has caught a few years ago. He's a lobster fisherman. I was on the phone to him 2 or 3 days ago, and he says they're catching them more often nowadays. It's not known why these, he coined the term exotic lobsters. Now, there's a chapter on lobsters, which I call exotic lobsters, and he coined the term exotic lobsters. We're not quite sure why these lobsters have strange colors, exotic colors. It's thought they could possibly be due to the crustacyanin complex, that in the blue lobsters, there's probably an excess of the protein. In the orange ones, there's no protein at all, just the free red pigment. And in the white ones, often called albino lobsters, the complex is probably completely different. And this variation is possibly due to genetic mutations. But it's very difficult to do research on all this because they're so rare, and it's very difficult to get specimens into the laboratory. And also, there's a tradition here, is good luck for the lobster fishermen to throw back an exotic lobster, a brightly colored lobster, back into the sea. It's good luck for the fishermen, not necessarily for the lobster, because the dark colors act as camouflage and prevent predators such as cod eating them. And if they're brightly colored, they'd be more attractive to the predators. So that's it. Could I have the next slide, please? Right, name dropping. Now here's a question. What do all these famous people have in common? Jane Austen I've already mentioned, Thomas Burberry I've already mentioned, but they're all mentioned in my book, one way to a greater or lesser extent. So Edward Elgar, for example, the composer, he features in a chapter on the hydrogen sulfide in the book. He developed an apparatus. He's an enthusiastic amateur chemist, and he developed an apparatus for making hydrogen sulfide in his home in Hereford. Old Harry That picture there on the right-hand side is called, those are Old Harry's Rocks on the south coast of England. In the far distance, you can see the beach resort Bournemouth. And Old Harry is meant to be a pirate who hid in a ship. And when the Spanish galleons, and this is back in the 15th century, and the Spanish ships sailed by an English channel, he would dash out in his ship and his other co-pirates and raid the galleons and steal the plunder their cargo, probably brandy and wine and gold and so on. William Wordsworth gets a mention because he wrote a poem about snowdrops, and I put that poem into the chapter on snowdrops. And what I'm trying to show here is that although chemistry is enmeshed in our very physical existence and an environment around us, it's also lurking just beneath the surface of a lot of our culture. I mean, just to give you an obvious example, William Wordsworth could not have written a poem about snowdrops unless snowdrops existed. And snowdrops would not exist if it weren't for antifreeze proteins and so on. So that's what I'm trying to get at, the link between the two cultures, science and the humanities and so on. So there is a link. Could I have the next slide, please? Right, these are the main themes of the book. Complexity of the chemical structures that nature makes, natural organic chemicals like proteins, astaxanthins, chlorophyll, so on and so forth. And as we've seen, they're everywhere. Chlorines, chlorophylls throughout the world. We see it growing in our trees outdoors. Diversity in nature makes not only very complicated, complex molecules, but also very simple ones like O2, oxygen, H2O, one of my favorite chemicals. CO2, carbon dioxide, and so on. And as we've seen on the slide about chlorophyll, nature's chemistry can be very challenging. Numbers, I've mentioned how the wax esters and lanolin, there's thousands of them, but there's lots of other examples in my book. One you can think of is the DNA in our body, the chromosomes in our body contain DNA, 23 pairs of chromosomes in most of the cells, not our red blood cells in our bodies. And the largest chromosome, which is chromosome number 1, the DNA in it, which if you look at the DNA molecule, it's like a spiral ladder with rungs. And each rung is called a base pair. And a molecule of DNA in chromosome number 1 contains about 250 million base pairs. And that's inside the nucleus of a cell inside our bodies. And even the smallest chromosome, which is I think number 22, has about 50 million base pairs in its DNA. I also refer in quite a few cases to uses and abuses of nature's amazing chemistry or amazing chemicals. There you see a picture of some opium poppies, which I took in Battle Down, which is just this Roman, that down right next to the Roman road path, which I showed you earlier. One day I was reading the papers that opium poppies are being grown at a secret location in Hampshire. This is many years ago. So the following day I walked outside, walked up the Roman road path, and what I see, a field of opium poppies. So opium poppies have been used and abused. I mean, the use of morphine in them, was an alkaloid. It's used for palliative care, for pain relief, and so on. But they've also been abused, as we know, in heroin addiction and so on. And then there's the nature's mysteries. And one of the most mysterious chemical substances that I discovered when I was working on this book was soil. Can I have the next slide, please? Secrets of soil. This is another picture I took while out walking. Soil consists of 4 components. 1 is air, 2 is water, 3 is minerals such as sand and chalk and other minerals and so on. And the 4th one is organic carbon. Now, soil contains more, or the soil on our planet contains more organic carbon than the whole of vegetation and atmosphere on our planet combined. The greatest reservoir of organic carbon, incidentally, it lies at the bottom of our oceans. But organic carbon is obviously important for soil fertility and health and so on. Now, the soil organic carbon in soil, there are two types, which is pretty obvious when I mention it. One are the living organisms, which contain organic carbon, like bacteria, fungi, ants, seeds, and so on, lots of little insects. So there's living organic carbon in soil. But there's also non-living organic carbon in soil, and that is called humus. And it's composed of substances called humic substances. Now, when I was researching this and writing about this, I found when I got to this humus bit, the non-living organic carbon, I found it extremely challenging. In fact, I even thought of giving up writing this chapter, but I couldn't get my head around the science of humus and humic substances, and for very good reason. And which I'm going to explain to you now by reading out one or two quotes. There's an soil microbiologist called Selman Waxman, another Nobel Prize winner, and he wrote a book in 1936 about humus. It's an immense book. It's available online. I haven't read it all, but I have dipped into it. I've hunted through it, looking for various things, and it's over 500 pages long. And at the end, there are something like 1,300 references to scientific magazines and journals and scientific papers and so on. So he did an immense amount of research on the chemistry of soil and the composition of soil. And I just want to read out a quote from the preface of his book. He writes, "No other phase of chemistry has been so much confused is that of humus," and I was certainly confused. And we can then fast forward to another book, which I have on the bookshelf, on humic substances, published by the Royal Society of Chemistry, no less, in 2000, the year 2000. And on the very first page, we read, "There are no universally accepted definitions of the terms humic substances and humus that are widely used to refer to non-living natural organic matter in soils and waters." Of course, soils run off into lakes and streams and so on. So the organic matter. So there are no widely accepted definitions. And this is what I found confusing when I was researching on this, the different definitions, the terminology, the nomenclature. Now, the word, I was going to mention something else. The second chapter in this book is a paper, a scientific paper by a group of an international team of scientists in the second chapter, and they write, I'm going to read it again to you, "Unlike any other group of natural products, humic substances have remained a mystery to structural analysis." Now, the humic substances are formed by the decomposition and rotting of the remains of plants and animals, even bacteria, microorganisms. So they rot down and form these smaller organic compounds. And there are thousands of them. And there's a group in Naples in Italy who've coined this concept, or developed this concept of what's called the soil humiome. And this soil humiome is composed of these small organic molecules, these breakdown products of humic substances and humus. And they've analyzed various samples of soil and shown that they contain thousands of small molecules, uniquely different small molecules, and they're sometimes joined together by very weak chemical bonds. They're called supramolecular associations. And the problem here is analyzing the soil, because if you use wet chemistry, solvents and so on, to dissolve, separate them, then you interfere with the chemistry of the soil. So there have been non-invasive techniques, X-ray analytical techniques, and I did read one or two papers about this, but I still couldn't get my head around it. They showed that, oh, there's so many carboxylic acid groups, so many alcohol groups and so on, but they didn't identify the specific substances in the soil. Well, in my research on this, I did discover one gem, and we go back to Selman Waxman, the American soil microbiologist, And back in the early 1900s, he was working on a species of bacteria and showed that this species of bacteria inhibited the growth of other species of bacteria. So he began to investigate that with his team of researchers and showed that there's a chemical responsible for inhibiting the growth of the other bacteria, and that was called streptomycin. It's a type of chemical called an aminoglycoside. That is a carbohydrate that contains nitrogen. And that streptomycin is now used to treat tuberculosis and also other bacterial infections. And in fact, Salman Waxman, coined the term antibiotic. That came from soil. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, I think I'm getting to the end of everything now. Right, there's 2 points about this picture on the right-hand side, which I took in 2018. First of all, I devote a whole chapter to Old Harry's rocks and one of the flowers that are growing along these cliffs on the right-hand side there. Old Harry's rocks, if you continue that picture along at the top there, Old Harry's rocks would roughly be where the word supreme is. So back in 2018, when I took this picture, it was a hot summer's day. We were with the family. And about 2 hours later, you couldn't see any sand there for people. And on the right-hand side at the bottom, you can see a path there. That's called the West Cliff Zigzag Path. This is Bournemouth and Bournemouth Beach. On the top, right at the top there, you can just about see the white buildings. That's a place called Sandbanks. And if you walk along the beach slopes, we did the following year, my wife and I, you get to a place called Camford Cliffs. I describe all this in my book, where I saw these yellow flowers. They're called wild cabbages. And you also get them, I also saw them in the zigzag path earlier. So that's one point. This sort of features in a chapter on Old Harry's rocks and limestone rocks and the chemistry of cabbages, wild cabbage, and so on. The other point is that all these people on this beach, including you who are listening or watching, and we're all are very similar in many ways. We all breathe in oxygen. We all drink water fluids, contain water. We consume carbohydrates, proteins, natural chemicals, and we convert these into energy and proteins and so on and so forth, flesh, blood, and bones. And so I'll sort of leave you with this sort of final statement here, that every living organism, including human beings, that has ever lived on our planet is a biochemical system living in a chemical world. I did think of putting in the word unique there, but I didn't get around to doing it. Our planet, every living organism that has ever lived on our planet is a unique biochemical system living in a chemical world. And I just want to finish off by reading you another quote, which I meant to put in my book, but I didn't get around to it, so I put it in the preface of the book. And this is from Charles Dickens, a novelist, English novelist, from his novel A Tale of Two Cities. And he writes, "A wonderful fact to reflect upon, that every human creature, including these people here, is constituted to be that profound secret and mystery to every other." Now, I think that's a profound thought in this novel, and I have no doubt that nature's amazing chemistry lies at the heart of that. One final thought, if I may. Nature cares for us by providing all our material needs. If we are to care for nature, I think we need to understand its chemistry and the impact of humans on nature. So this is why I think it's important to understand nature's amazing chemistry. That's it. I think we're going to hand over to a poll now.
Yes, we have one more poll for everyone. As Michael described, he gets a lot of his inspiration while going out and about on a walk. How often do you think about nature's chemistry while on a walk? It seems like a lot of people think about, at least frequently to sometimes, they're thinking about nature's chemistry on a walk. I don't know if I think about nature's chemistry per se, but I think about how incredible, in a roundabout way, it is the chemistry of it, how just incredible the diversity of plant life, animal life, nature is around us, and the basis of that is chemistry, isn't it? So yeah, I guess I do think about it quite often. Lovely. I think that's going to be all of our answers. Lots of frequently and lots of sometimes. Oh, lovely.
Yeah, just interesting on the comment on that. It's interesting to see that over 90% of people do think about chemistry, whether they're out walking frequently or sometimes. Yeah, I just want to end up by thanking everybody. These are all people that have been involved in the work with me in publishing this book. So thank you to all, and thank you to everybody who listened and tuned in and registered to this. I hope you found it interesting. But I think we're going to have a Q&A now.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks so much, Michael. That was a really, really lovely, wonderful presentation. Nature's chemistry is such a wide, vast subject, as I'm sure you are definitely familiar with. So to think that, you know, you've covered it in such an incredible breadth and with such eloquence, and to think that that's only just a fraction of what your book covers. So it's quite exciting. Definitely a good reason for us to all go out and take advantage and have a read of Michael's book. I'm certainly excited to do so myself. So we have a couple different questions from the audience. One comment that I actually thought was quite nice. We have somebody named Davina who says they have, I think it was one of your previous books. It's, yes, Chemistry in Action, the textbook. They have that textbook and they still use it all the time, which is really lovely to hear. So I just wanted to share that with you, Michael. I have certainly my own questions, but I wanted to start out with one referring to slide number 9, specifically looking at the structure of chlorophyll. And I wanted to ask you, why exactly does chlorophyll have those 2 E numbers off to the side?
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, E140, which I showed on the slide, is the natural compound. Yeah, but chlorophyll, when it's isolated, it's a solid, and it's insoluble in water, which is just as well, because if every time it rained, the rain would come down dripping in from the trees as green if it was soluble in water. So E140 is a semi-synthetic derivative of chlorophyll, and instead of magnesium, I think it contains copper and some sodium ions that allow it to dissolve in water. So if you want to use E140, I suppose you could have a dispersion of it in an oil. But if you want it to dissolve in water, then you'd have to use E141. So that's a major difference between the two of them. One is soluble in water and one isn't soluble in water.
I see. That's a really good point. I didn't realize, yeah, if it was soluble, you just have green coming off every time it rained, and England would be a rather brown, grey looking place. Thankfully, we do have lots of green around us here in England, courtesy of the rain. So another question for you. This one is specific to the scent of violets. So someone asked, the scent of violets has an unusual characteristic of it not causing nose blindness, as in the same way that other strong scents do. How do the compounds responsible for this? I believe, and correct me if I'm mispronouncing this, they are pronounced ionones. How are these compounds responsible for this scent, and how do they accomplish this behavior? Is that something that you came across while writing your book, Michael?
No, I'm familiar with olfactory fatigue, which I mentioned about hydrogen sulfide, that you smell things and after a while you don't sense the smell, especially your own body odors. But I'm not familiar with violets and the sense that they give off. So it may be an interesting topic to look into. It really would be.
Yeah.
So as I understand it, then you can't smell them. Is that right? Or...
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it myself, but it sounds like, yeah, they don't cause nose blindness. So, and I always thought nose blindness was something that happens, as you say, over time. Where I actually grew up, we had quite a hefty sulfur deposit nearby, and eventually it's surprising how quickly you can kind of get used to the smell, isn't it?
I'm not familiar with the term nose blindness. Does that mean olfactory fatigue, that you can't smell something? I
believe so, yes, yeah.
Because one question I never asked when I was doing research on snowdrops, and the chapter on it is, do they smell? And in fact, I've never picked snowdrops. I've just taken photographs and looked at them, but I don't pick them. I've never bent down to smell them. I don't know if they have a smell or not. Yeah.
One for the next book, maybe, or a follow-up chapter, perhaps. Yeah. Another question for you. Let's see. Is it possible, somebody's asking, is it possible to have an alternative to kind of chemically based fertilizers? Is there an eco-friendly fertilizer available?
That's an interesting question. Can I tell you a little story about that?
Yes, absolutely. Go for
I
it.
go back to the 1950s and 60s, and we used to have milk delivered by a milkman who used to drive a horse and cart, right?
Wow.
And my father was a keen gardener, so he used to give me a bucket and a shovel. He said, if you can fill this bucket up with horse manure, I'll give you a shilling, which is like equivalent to 5p nowadays. And so I used to follow this horse and cart around and show up the horse manure to put onto his garden or our garden and so on. So I mean, animal manure has been used for centuries, and that is, I presume, eco-friendly. It's the most famous notable one is the guano, which was used almost on an industrial scale in the 19th century. It's very rich in NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the nutrients. And the guano is produced from seabird droppings and bat droppings and so on. I think even in some countries, human excrement has been used as a fertilizer.
I have heard that, yeah.
And but I think farmers have to be very careful even using animal manure to fertilize ground, because if you use too much of it, then you can poison the soil and you get runoff into the environment, the lakes and streams of nitrogen, for example, which can cause things like eutrophication, where you get these algal blooms and so on. So it has to be managed properly, animal manure or compost, the form
of course. Yeah, that was the first thought that came to mind for me, was the eutrophication aspect of it. I think even if you are using, as you say, we've been using animal manure for centuries. But if you have too much of a good thing, it can become quite bad quite quickly. So I think that is an excellent point. Using even the most natural substances can be potentially eco-harmful if used too much. We have another question here. Which natural chemical processes did you find most surprising or inspiring while writing the book?
Well, I think one of the most was the one I mentioned in one of my last slides, was the soil. The process of going from the rotten soil, the organic components of non-living matter in soil, the remains of animals and plants, they rot and decompose. They break down into smaller organic chemicals, and that is called humification. And there's been an immense debate about this process, how it works, and whether you get stable compounds, the end products are stable or not, and whether they give rise to the brown colors in soil or not. I mean, it's very challenging and interesting, I find, and there's a lot of research that has to be done on this to find out what's going on. Another thing which I found quite interesting and inspiring was when I was writing about the lobsters. The lobsters consume these microalgae, these krill or shrimps which contain astaxanthin, and that gets into the stomachs and into the flesh. How does it get from the flesh into the shells, the exoskeletons, and combine with the proteins? Now, I don't think anybody knows. I don't know if they've done research on this or not, but it must be chemical processes that do this. I mean, it's just fascinating. There's a lot I could spend all my time researching these things, but quite often I hit roadblocks. I just can't get any further because there's just not the information out there, or if there is the information out there, it's behind a paywall, and I'd have to pay $50 or something to read a scientific paper. And sometimes I might not even use it. Sometimes when I write even one sentence, I might refer to 4 or 5 different scientific papers. They have to be open access, or the abstracts, because I could write a sentence or research a sentence and look at 4 or 5 scientific papers. It's cost me $40 or $50, and then I don't need that. I don't need that information. $200 for nothing. So that is one of the problems of being a science writer, is this paywall for me. You get around it by looking at other papers.
Yeah, it is challenging, isn't it? It's interesting that you mentioned the... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
That's a little rant of mine.
I think it's something that, you know, I've run into that quite a bit myself. It is frustrating in this day and age, isn't it? But something that I did find that is it the carotenoids or those kind of compounds, how they do, how they make their way into kind of the flesh and the exoskeleton of the lobsters. It's quite interesting. My mom always told me a story, and I don't know if maybe she was just joking around with me. I don't know how much truth there was into this, but she told me when we were younger, my oldest brother just absolutely loved carrots, just could not get enough of carrots, ate so many carrots at one point that his cheeks started turning orange, which I didn't know if that's a thing, but you know, if it happens in lobsters, perhaps it happens in people. Is that something you've heard of?
Yeah, it's interesting, the carotenoids, because I write about this in another chapter on autumn leaves. In autumn, the chlorophyll breaks down at a faster rate, but beneath the chlorophyll, there are also carotenoids, which give the autumn leaves the yellow and orange colors, and the chlorophyll breaks down much faster than the carotenoids. So the green color goes first, leaving the pigment, the carotenoid colors, in autumn. So that's quite interesting there.
Oh gosh, yeah, I'd never thought about that, but it must be just the chlorophyll is either present in a higher number, or maybe the pigment is more concentrated. So that seems to be the primary color that you see, and then as you know, as the seasons change and the chlorophyll fades, you have the carotenoids coming out.
And there's another mystery here: is why do you get these red colors in autumn? And the red colors are due to a chemical called anthocyanin. Why does nature make anthocyanin, right, you know, when the leaves are just going to drop? So it's investing a lot of energy into making these things, which can drop off the trees. I mean, the chlorophyll is obviously there, and the carotenoid is there for photosynthesis, you know, to generate the energy, to convert the CO2 and the water into carbohydrates and so on and so forth. But the anthocyanins, I don't know what function they have in plants, and they're produced right at the end, and they just drop off the trees. So I don't know what, that's a mystery.
It seems like a waste. It seems like an energetic, but the only thing I would think, and I'm not an expert in this at all, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is thinking, are the anthocyanins, are those a byproduct of a different chemical reaction? So rather than being a product that's made with a purpose, rather it's a remnant of a reaction that's already happened. But I could be showing my ignorance there, I don't know.
I don't know either. Yeah, I mean, there's a chapter on this on poppies, the different anthocyanins, and they have different colors, different pigments. Yeah, but I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, the wonderful things of science. We never know all the answers, do we?
Yeah.
Oh well, thank you so much, Michael. I think that about signals that our time is up. But there was a very interesting discussion. Any other questions that anyone has, feel free to send them in, and we will pass them along to Michael, who may be able to answer them if he can. But thank you, Michael, for dedicating your time and sharing your book with all of us. As a reminder, Michael's book is available for purchase through the RSC bookstore. You can use discount code AMAZING25 at checkout to get 25% off. And we'll be sure to include this in our follow-up email as well. I think Chris may have posted that in the chat somewhere. But I'd also like to make one final.
Can I make one final point? In my presentation, I showed quite a few of my own photographs, right? And there's quite a few of my own photographs in the book. Those are the ones that don't have any credit lines at all. And if anybody's interested, I'd be quite happy to share those for personal use. You just have to email me. The email number is somewhere in the book. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we'll also include your email address as well in the follow-up emails, Michael, in case anybody would like to take you up on that. That's very generous of you. Thank you. Some lovely images in that, in your book as well as in the presentation. A quick thank you to the rest of the Chemistry World digital team, Chris Pink and Ben Vassler, who have been in the background doing some lovely magic for us, making us sound and look lovely. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you in another Chemistry World webinar soon. I'm Mariana Kneppers, Chemistry World Science Media Producer. Goodbye, and see you next time.